The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of Riverside Avenue, where chain-link fences separated modest homes from the busy street. Traffic hummed past in its usual rhythm, drivers focused on their destinations, oblivious to the quiet desperation brewing just yards away. It was the kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business, where looking the other way had become an art form. Sarah Martinez pressed her face against the cold metal of the fence, her fingers gripping the wire until her knuckles turned white. At 28, she should have been living her best life, but instead, she found herself trapped in a nightmare that seemed to have no exit. Her two young children, Emma and Jake, ages 6 and 4, clung to her legs like lifelines, their innocent eyes reflecting a fear no child should ever know. The house behind them had become a prison. What started as love had twisted into something dark and controlling, where every word was monitored, every movement questioned, and every attempt at independence met with escalating violence. The bruises on Sarah's arms told a story she was too ashamed to share, hidden beneath long sleeves, even in the sweltering heat. As motorcycles rumbled past on their weekend rides, Sarah found herself watching them with a mixture of fear and fascination. Society had taught her to be afraid of these leather-clad riders, but something in their brotherhood, their loyalty to each other, made her wonder if they might understand protection in a way others couldn't. She had heard whispers about the Bandidos MC, how they handled problems that the system couldn't or wouldn't touch. When the familiar sound of heavy boots approached from behind, Sarah knew her window was closing. But as fate would have it, this would be the day everything changed. If you're moved by stories of unexpected heroes stepping up when it matters most, hit that subscribe button and join our community of people who believe in the power of brotherhood. The distinctive sound of Harley-Davidson engines filled the air as 5 members of the Bandidos motorcycle club rolled down Riverside Avenue on their regular Saturday route. These weren't the stereotypical outlaws that Hollywood portrayed, but working men who had found brotherhood in the roar of engines and the open road. Tank, the chapter president, led the group with the quiet authority that came from years of military service and life experience. Behind him rode Diesel, a construction foreman whose massive frame belied his gentle nature with children. Roadkill, despite his intimidating road name, was a devoted father of 3 who coached Little League on weekends. Snake worked as a paramedic, saving lives by day and riding for freedom by night. Bringing up the rear was Preacher, an ordained minister who had found his calling both in the pulpit and on the asphalt. As they approached the residential section, Tank's trained eye caught movement at the fence line. Years of military service in Afghanistan had taught him to notice details others missed, and something about the woman pressed against the chain link triggered his protective instincts. He raised his hand, signaling the group to slow down, their engines dropping to a low rumble. Sarah's heart pounded as the motorcycles approached. Every instinct told her to step back, to retreat into the shadows, but desperation gave her courage she didn't know she possessed. Her children sensed the tension, pressing closer to her legs as the leather-clad figures came to a stop just feet away from the fence. The moment stretched like eternity as Sarah locked eyes with Tank through his sunglasses. In that instant, she made a decision that would change everything. With her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of months of silent suffering, she spoke the words that would set everything in motion. "Help us," Sarah whispered through the fence, her voice so quiet it almost disappeared into the rumble of idling engines. But Tank heard it, and in those 2 simple words, he recognized the desperation of someone who had exhausted all other options. His military training had taught him to assess situations quickly, and everything about this scene screamed domestic violence. The other Bandidos exchanged glances, their brotherhood allowing them to communicate without words. They had all seen this before, the long sleeves in summer heat, the way she positioned herself between her children and the house, the haunted look in her eyes that spoke of systematic abuse. These men, despite their intimidating appearance, had a code that put the protection of women and children above all else. Tank killed his engine and approached the fence slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Ma'am," he said quietly, removing his sunglasses so she could see his eyes, "are you and your children safe?" The question was simple, but it carried the weight of genuine concern. that Sarah hadn't heard in months. Tears began to stream down Sarah's face as she shook her head. "He's inside," she managed to say, glancing nervously toward the house. "He said if I ever tried to leave again, he'd make sure I never saw my babies again. I don't know what to do. The police came before, but he's always so charming, so convincing. They believed him over me." The sound of a door slamming from the direction of the house made Sarah jump, and the children whimpered in fear. Tank's jaw tightened as he saw the terror in their eyes. Behind him, his brothers had positioned themselves strategically, their presence creating an intimidating wall of leather and steel. What happened next would demonstrate the true meaning of brotherhood, and the lengths good men will go to protect the innocent. Marcus Thompson emerged from the house with the swagger of a man accustomed to intimidating others. At 6'2" with a muscular build, he had used his physical presence to control Sarah for months. But as he stepped into the backyard and saw the line of motorcycles, his confident demeanor faltered. 5 bandidos stood between him and the fence, their presence transforming the dynamic entirely. "Sarah, get away from there," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the edge that usually sent her scrambling for compliance. But something had changed. With the bikers as witnesses, Sarah found strength she had forgotten she possessed. She remained at the fence, her children pressed close to her sides, finally having advocates in her corner. Tank stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Sir, we're just having a conversation with the lady here. No law against talking through a fence." His words were measured, but every member of the MC understood the subtext. They weren't going anywhere until they were satisfied that Sarah and her children were safe. Marcus's face reddened as he realized his usual tactics wouldn't work with these men. "This is private property," he snarled, "and you're trespassing. I'm calling the police." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The same police he had manipulated before were now being summoned against men who were simply standing on a public street. Diesel pulled out his phone with deliberate slowness. "That's a great idea," he said, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. "We'll wait right here with you until they arrive. I'm sure they'd be interested in hearing everyone's story." The tables had turned, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt hope beginning to bloom in her chest as she realized she wasn't alone anymore. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived, their officers stepping out with the weary expressions of cops who had responded to this address before. Officer Jennifer Rodriguez recognized Sarah immediately, remembering the previous calls where evidence of abuse was present, but victims too scared to press charges. This time, however, the dynamic was completely different. The presence of the Bandidos had created an atmosphere where truth could finally surface. Sarah, emboldened by her leather-clad protectors, began to speak with a clarity and strength that surprised even herself. She rolled up her sleeves, revealing bruises in various stages of healing. She spoke about the threats, the isolation, the systematic destruction of her self-worth. Snake, drawing on his paramedic training, pointed out signs of abuse that the officers might have missed in previous visits. "Those finger marks on her throat are consistent with strangulation," he said professionally. "And the way those children are clinging to their mother suggests they've witnessed domestic violence." His medical expertise added weight to Sarah's testimony. Marcus's carefully constructed facade began to crumble under the scrutiny of multiple witnesses who couldn't be intimidated or manipulated. His usual charm offensive fell flat when faced with men who had seen real evil and weren't impressed by his performance. The officers, now with multiple witnesses and clear evidence, had no choice but to take action. As handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had carried for far too long. But the Bandido's work was far from over. Tank approached the fence once more, his voice gentle but determined. "Ma'am, you and your children need somewhere safe to stay tonight. We know people who can help." The brotherhood that had started with protection was about to extend into something much deeper. If these stories of everyday heroes stepping up inspire you, smash that like button and let us know in the comments about a time someone unexpected helped you when you needed it most. Within an hour, the Bandidos had mobilized a network that would have impressed any social service agency. Tank's wife, Maria, arrived with clothes and toys for the children. while Preacher contacted the women's shelter where his church volunteered regularly. Diesel used his construction connections to secure temporary housing, and Roadkill's wife began organizing a support system that would help Sarah rebuild her life. The efficiency of their response revealed something that outsiders rarely understood about motorcycle clubs like the Bandidos. Beneath the leather and intimidating appearance lay men who had chosen to be guardians of their community. Many were veterans who had served their country, fathers who cherished their own families, and working men who understood the value of standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Sarah watched in amazement as this group of strangers orchestrated her escape with military precision. Emma and Jake, initially frightened by the imposing figures, began to warm up to the gentle giants who spoke to them in soft voices and offered them snacks. For the first time in months, she saw her children smile without fear shadowing their faces. As the sun began to set, Sarah found herself standing in the parking lot of a secure women's shelter, her children safely beside her and a bag of donations from the MC wives in her hands. Tank approached her one final time, pressing a card into her palm. "This has my number," he said quietly. "If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call. The Brotherhood doesn't abandon family." The word family hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. These strangers had claimed her and her children as their own, creating a protective circle that extended far beyond blood relations. As the motorcycles rumbled away into the night, Sarah realized that her nightmare was ending, but more importantly, a new chapter of hope and healing was just beginning. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of her new apartment, keys trembling in her hand as she unlocked a door that belonged to her and her children alone. The Bandidos had kept their promise, helping her navigate legal proceedings, find employment, and rebuild her shattered confidence. Tank's wife Maria had become like a sister, while the other MC families had embraced Emma and Jake as honorary nieces and nephew. The ripple effects of that single moment of courage at the fence continued to spread throughout the community. Sarah's story had inspired other women in the shelter to speak up about their own situations. The local police department, impressed by the MC's professional handling of the situation, had begun working with them on community outreach programs focused on domestic violence awareness. Preacher had incorporated Sarah's story into his Sunday sermons, speaking about how angels sometimes wear leather instead of white robes. His congregation, initially skeptical of the motorcycle club connection, had been moved to start a fund for domestic violence victims. The story spread through social media, changing perceptions and challenging stereotypes about who the real heroes in society might be. Emma and Jake thrived in their new environment, their laughter returning as the trauma began to heal. They looked forward to the monthly barbecues at the MC clubhouse, where they were treated like royalty by men who understood that protecting children was the highest calling any man could answer. Their nightmares faded, replaced by dreams of a future filled with possibility. But perhaps the most profound change was in Sarah herself. The broken woman who had whispered for help through a chain-link fence had transformed into an advocate for other victims. She began volunteering at the shelter, sharing her story and showing other women that escape was possible, that there were people willing to stand between them and their abusers. Today, Sarah works as a victim advocate, her office walls decorated with pictures of her children and thank you cards from women she's helped escape similar situations. The Bandidos MC chapter has officially partnered with 3 local shelters, their intimidating presence serving as a deterrent to abusers who might otherwise try to track down their victims. What started as one woman's desperate plea has evolved into a systematic approach to community protection. Tank still leads the Saturday rides down Riverside Avenue, but now they serve a dual purpose: recreation and patrol. The neighborhood has become safer, not through violence or vigilantism, but through the simple presence of men who care about their community. Other MC chapters across the state have heard the story and implemented similar programs, creating a network of protection that spans hundreds of miles. The children Emma and Jake have grown into confident, happy kids who understand that real strength comes from protecting others, not dominating them. They've learned that heroes don't always wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they wear leather vests and ride Harleys. Their mother's courage and the Brotherhood's response have shaped their understanding of what it means to stand up for what's right. Marcus Thompson served 18 months in prison and is now required to attend anger management classes and maintain a restraining order. The system that once failed Sarah now works more effectively, partly because the community has become more engaged and watchful. The Bandidos' involvement brought media attention that forced accountability and change. The fence where Sarah whispered her desperate plea for help has been replaced, but the memory of that moment continues to inspire action. It reminds us that heroism isn't about cape-wearing superheroes. It's about ordinary people who choose to act when they see injustice. Sometimes the most unlikely angels are the ones who make the biggest difference. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who needs to remember that help can come from the most unexpected places. Comment below and tell us about the everyday heroes in your community who deserve recognition.